All right, let's go straight to this interview. In her book titled My Journey, businesswoman Magda Wierzycka has shared her life lessons and business principles that she says have driven her and also brought her success. Now, in the book, she says she's excited, but at the same time, she's concerned about the future. And without giving much away, let's speak to her now as she joins us. Magda, thank you so much for your time as we chat this evening. I mean, in your book, you say South Africa is arguably living through its most challenging moment since P.W. Botha's infamous Rubicon speech of 1985. What do you base this on?
Well, I base it on the fact that I think we really can't catch a break. So we had, problems, unemployment, lack of education, poor policing, all the things that we are aware of, electricity issues, pre-pandemic. The pandemic has just exacerbated everything in South Africa, with unemployment at over 35%. That's the official rate of unemployment. Unofficial rate is probably somewhere well above 50%. And with the fact that we actually, and then obviously the floods in KwaZulu-Natal, and more broadly, this lack of a viable, feasible, implementable economic policy that can generate jobs and improve education. I think, we are heading, unfortunately, down my low road scenario for South Africa as opposed to the high road, which I also outline in the book.
And tell us a little bit more about this low road, because the high one I am going to talk to you about in just a moment, where you call on civil society and the business to be able to work together. But let's talk about this low road that you say we're heading towards.
Well, the low road scenario is very much, almost continuing as we are. So, Eskom gets and Eskom's debts increase. There is no, viable way of enhancing electricity production, be it through generation and, allowing independent power production. If our debts start increasing because, public service is very large, the salaries increases are potentially unsustainable, so the government needs to borrow more. If our unemployment rate continues at this rate or continues increasing, we are facing social unrest, we are facing, increasing crime levels. If there isn't cohesion and, in government, and this rooting out of corruption, which has literally eaten South Africa alive. And, we are spiraling downwards. And what it means ultimately is that I do think ANC will lose its majority in the next national elections. And, we are potentially faced with some kind of unstable coalition government, which will swing from left to right without, again, solid economic policies, which we so badly need.
At the same time, you then say that, you have this high road scenario that would see business, civil society organizations, trade unions, as well as opposition parties taking a stronger stance against corruption. We're seeing talk about this in the public domain all the time, civil society decrying corruption and all of that. Are you saying that they're not doing enough?
Of course, I'm saying they're not doing enough. It's almost, you cannot open a newspaper these days, South African newspaper, without reading about more uncovered corruption. So literally, it's day by day, there is more happening. And at the same time, we cannot see any tangible consequences of what we are seeing. So no one seems to be prosecuted, apart from, some random cases. We have some very obvious prosecutions which should be taking place right now. VBS Bank as a very good example. Steinhoff, if one wants to look at, kind of non-government corruption, but private sector corruption. And yet, absolutely nothing is happening. And, if people don't feel fear, if they don't feel that there are consequences to what they are doing, then they will just continue doing it. And there is no morality to it. And I think, we've seen that lack of morality during the pandemic, where, people profiteered from PPE at a point at which people were dying. How much worse can it get?
Let's talk about, your reflections years on, because I remember there was a point where you came under serious attack. You were called a racist. Some were even questioning your involvement in, with the Helen Suzman Foundation at some point, saying that, you are just taking advantage of poor people. And you've also even said that you've made yourself hugely unpopular, but you don't care anymore. Let's talk about your reflections when you look back at that time when you were called being, a racist and all of that. Let's talk about then the reflections to now. Do you think it was well worth it?
I think the point that one needs to make about this, being called a racist is who called me a racist. It's usually the people I called out on corruption, people who, threatened me on Twitter. I had to take injunctions against people. I had to hire security guards. So, it was a lot more serious than just being called a racist. I was called a racist in order for people to deflect attention from what they were doing. Obviously, it has taken a toll on me, and on my family, and I describe all of that, in the book. Often, in particular, I do describe my involvement in the Gupta leaks affair, and I have been asked by other people whether it has been worth it. Looking back. And my answer has been that, faced with the same decisions, I would have made exactly the same choices. But my one regret is that I don't think that it has made any difference whatsoever.
And talking about those Gupta leaks, at the time, you even talk about it, that you fled the country. You talk about the security concerns even around your family, not only just you at the time. I am keen to find out, because there were fingers pointing at you, saying that you leaked these emails to a newspaper. Did you?
I absolutely did not leak the emails to any newspapers. What I was advised to do, and I was informed, having been in possession of Gupta leaks, I was informed by a reliable source that the Gupta family was aware of the fact that there is this cachet of information in the public domain, or could come into the public domain. I took very serious legal advice. I was legally advised to democratize the data and make it public as quickly as possible in order to protect everyone. And consequently, I left the country. I spent time in a hotel room. I went through all those emails. I organized them into most relevant folders, and I distributed them to people in a position of power in South Africa, to heads of trade unions, to heads of political parties, to various ministers, to anyone that I thought had influence to make a change. But I certainly didn't distribute it to any media outlets, and I certainly didn't give any one media outlet preference over another. If I was going to do that, I would have obviously distributed to every media outlet, which I didn't do.
I'm keen to find out, as we wrap up our conversation with you, the State Capture Commission has released installments of its report. So we also are awaiting the fourth one, and then the fifth one is going to come in about 6 weeks. Some have said that the fact that the Guptas have not been, into the commission to give their version of events may mean that, what we see as, the findings there may be a whitewash, and we may never really know what extent the involvement has been, despite all this evidence being in those reports. I wonder, what are your thoughts when you look at the fact that they're still not in South Africa to give their version of events?
I don't believe that they will ever be prosecuted in South Africa. I think they've stolen enough money to ensure that they can, live very comfortable lives. Now, in terms of the involvement, I think, we've seen a lot of evidence coming out at Zondo Commission, much more than was known before. But, as being one of the people who have actually seen those emails, I can tell you right now, they had fingers in every single pie, and they were stealing and they were manipulating. And, they were manipulating, people who had very little. So it's very easy to take a cabinet minister or an MP being paid, relatively modest wages, and offer them more, not necessarily as much more as they stole, in order to effectively capture the state, which is what they've done. But no, I don't believe that we will see them in South Africa ever.
All right, Magda, let's leave it there for now. Thank you so much for your time this evening. That was Magda Wierzycka, and she's a CEO as well as an author. Of course, she's written a book called Magda, My Journey, and it details quite a lot of what she talks about, and part of it talks about the Gupta leaks, addresses that, and also looks at the role of civil society and business when it comes to the fight against corruption as well as opposition parties. But let's move on then to